The paleoclimate record teaches us that rapid climate change is really hard on societies. Climate changes at the end of the Ice Age contributed to megafauna extinctions and forced major changes in human subsistence. Droughts during the Holocene have toppled civilizations, and those were natural variations. Societies had no control over them. We're causing changes faster and potentially larger than those natural variations. With over 8 billion people to feed and house, many in areas vulnerable to climate change, the implications are staggering. Coastal cities face flooding from sea level rise. Agricultural regions face shifting rainfall and more extreme weather. Water resources are stressed by changing precipitation and glacial melt. Tropical regions could see temperatures exceeding human survivability thresholds for outdoor work during heat waves. Island nations could literally disappear. The humanitarian implications are enormous and unequally distributed. Those who contributed least to causing climate change are often the most vulnerable to its effects. But understanding the problem is the first step toward addressing it. We know more about climate now than ever before. We can see changes happening in real time with satellites and monitoring. We can model future scenarios with increasing accuracy. And we have technologies available that could dramatically reduce emissions if deployed at scale. Solar and wind are now cost competitive with fossil fuels in many places. Electric vehicles are becoming mainstream. Energy storage is improving. Carbon capture is being developed, though it's not yet proven at the necessary scale. The challenge isn't really technological anymore. It's political, economic, and social. Getting 8 billion people to coordinate on emission reductions, equitably distributing costs and benefits, navigating competing interests. That's the hard part. Climate change is the ultimate tragedy of the commons. Individual actors benefit from burning fossil fuels, but everyone suffers the consequences. Solving it requires collective action at a scale humanity has never achieved. Some people feel despair. The problem seems too big, changes too slow, obstacles too numerous. I understand that feeling. But humans have navigated existential challenges before. We survived the Ice Age through adaptation and innovation. We transitioned from hunting megafauna to agriculture, fundamentally transforming our relationship with the planet. We've overcome diseases, expanded lifespans, created technologies that would seem like magic to our ancestors. We're not helpless. We're just facing a problem requiring unprecedented coordination. The 100,000-year cycle will eventually resume, assuming we don't permanently alter it. The orbital mechanics haven't changed. Naturally, Earth would eventually slide back into glacial conditions tens of thousands of years from now. But we're writing a new chapter, one where human activity is a major climate driver, not just a responder. We're affecting the planet on a scale comparable to the astronomical forces that controlled climate for millions of years. No species has ever had this influence. It's both inspiring and terrifying. I sometimes imagine future geologists studying sediments millions of years from now. They'll see a clear marker, isotope ratios reflecting massive carbon combustion, extinction signatures, novel materials like plastics, and concrete and sediment. They'll recognize something unprecedented happened during this brief moment. Whether they'll also see evidence that we successfully navigated the crisis. That's still open. The answer depends on what we do in the coming decades. The cycle reminds us that climate is dynamic, sensitive to forcing, full of feedbacks and tipping points. It's not a stable, unchanging background. It's an active system responding to inputs. For millions of years, those inputs were natural. Now, we're adding a new input, and the system is responding. We're living through a moment unlike any other in Earth's 4.5 billion years. For the first time, a single species, us, understands the global climate system while simultaneously altering it. I find it staggering to consider. We possess knowledge and power no organism has ever held. What we choose to do with that power will determine Earth's trajectory for thousands, even millions of years. The Ice Age cycles have shown us just how resilient life can be. Earth has endured dramatic climate shifts, and life has always found a way to survive, adapt, and even thrive. Life even weathered the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. It will survive this too. The real question isn't whether life will endure, but whether human civilization as we know it will thrive. Or will we face massive disruptions that could have been avoided with foresight and decisive action? I began by discussing the mystery of the 100,000-year cycle and how patient scientific work ultimately solved it. That very same scientific community is now warning us about anthropogenic climate change, employing the same rigorous methods that revealed the Ice Age cycles. If we place our trust in the science that explained the past, shouldn't we also trust its predictions for the future? It's abundantly clear that we're pushing the climate system hard. We will see significant responses, and the window for averting the worst outcomes is rapidly closing. The Ice Age taught our ancestors the importance of adaptability and innovation. That resilience is embedded in our very DNA. We can harness those traits to navigate the challenge we've created, but to do so, we need to act collectively and with urgency. The climate system has momentum and inherent time lags. The actions we take today won't fully manifest for decades. However, inaction today commits us to changes that will unfold for centuries to come. Every year of delay only makes the eventual response more difficult and disruptive. So, where does that leave us? We're 11,700 years into an interglacial period that should eventually come to an end. We're armed with an understanding of how climate works, yet we are actively changing it at a rate faster than natural processes typically do. The 100,000-year cycle that shaped human evolution is now being overridden by human activity. We've become a geological force in our own right. The only remaining question is whether we will wield that power wisely or recklessly. The answer will determine what kind of planet future generations inherit and whether they will view us as ancestors who rose to the challenge or as a cautionary tale of a species that understood the problem but ultimately failed to act. The clock is ticking. The cycle that sustained life for millions of years is still operating in the background. But for the first time, it might not even matter. For the first time, one of the species it created has the power to override it. What we do with that power in the next few decades will determine not just our future, but the future of countless other species that share this planet with us. The Ice Age is over. The question now is, what comes next? And unlike our ancestors, who simply had to survive the cycle, we have the power to shape it. That's both an incredible responsibility and an incredible opportunity. It's time to see what we do with it. It might mess with your head a bit, but it's true. I'm living in an ice age right now. You are too. It's been going on for about 2.6 million years, if you can believe it. And every 100,000 years, like clockwork, our planet transforms as massive ice sheets cover huge portions of the continents only to melt away again. So why 100,000 years? I've always wondered what was so special about that number. Turns out, it has everything to do with how Earth wobbles through space. Before I dive into the science of it all, let me paint a picture of what this cycle actually creates. When Earth tips into a full glacial period, it becomes home to some of the most bizarre and magnificent creatures that have ever existed. I'm talking woolly mammoths trudging through frozen grasslands, giant ground sloths digging tunnels the size of my house, and saber-toothed cats hunting prey that weighed several tons. This 100,000-year cycle literally shaped the evolution of life on Earth for millions of years. And about 10,000 years ago, most of these incredible animals just vanished. The cycle shifted, ice melted, and suddenly the megafauna that had dominated the planet for hundreds of thousands of years couldn't make it. We're still trying to figure out exactly why. Climate change, humans, both. The debate is still raging. I want to break down this 100,000-year cycle, how it works, why it happens, what kind of world it creates during the cold phases, and what happens when it shifts back to warm. We'll meet the creatures that thrived in Ice Age conditions, learn how humans survived and adapted, and understand why it all came crashing down so recently. And I want to talk about where we are in the cycle right now and what that means for our future. Let's start with the basics. An ice age isn't just a cold period, it's an extended chunk of time, millions of years, where Earth's temperature drops enough that massive ice sheets and glaciers take over large portions of the planet's surface. And we're currently in one, the Pleistocene Ice Age, which kicked off about 2.6 million years ago and technically hasn't ended yet. Now, within any ice age, you get fluctuations. There are glacial periods where it's really frozen and interglacial periods where it warms up. We're in an interglacial period right now and have been for about 11,700 years. So when people say the Ice Age, they usually mean the last glacial period, which lasted from about 115,000 years ago to 11,700 years ago. That's when the ice sheets were at their biggest and the megafauna were running the show. During that last glacial period, the temperature was only about 6 degrees Celsius colder than today on average. 6 degrees doesn't sound like much, right? But we're not talking about 6 degrees in one spot. We're talking about 6 degrees worth of thermal energy being sucked out of the entire planet. All the oceans, all the land masses, the whole atmosphere. That's enough to completely transform the world. Huge ice sheets covered most of Canada and northern Europe. The Laurentide ice sheet in North America and the Fennoscandian ice sheet in Europe were kilometers thick in some places because so much water was locked up in ice. Sea levels dropped by over 100 meters. You could walk from England to France. You could stroll from Asia to Alaska, across what's now the Bering Strait. The coastlines were completely different, and the landscape mostly tundra and cold grasslands, dry and windswept, nothing like the forests we see today. So what caused this? Why does Earth go through these dramatic swings every 100,000 years? The answer starts with this Serbian scientist named Milutin Milankovitch. Back in the early 1900s, this guy figured out something nobody else had really considered. What if ice ages weren't caused by anything happening on Earth, but by changes in Earth's position relative to the Sun? See, Earth's orbit isn't perfectly circular, it's slightly elliptical. And the shape of that ellipse changes over time because of gravitational pulls from other planets, mainly Jupiter and Saturn. Sometimes our orbit is more circular, sometimes it's more stretched out. And this cycle of changing from circular to elliptical and back takes about 100,000 years. That's the first Milankovitch cycle, called eccentricity. When Earth's orbit is highly elliptical, the distance between Earth and the Sun varies more dramatically throughout the year. This affects how much solar radiation hits different parts of the planet at different times. And here's the crucial part. It's not about how much total sunlight Earth gets, it's about where and when that sunlight hits. Northern Hemisphere summers are the key because that's where most of the land is. If Northern Hemisphere summers are cool enough that winter snow doesn't fully melt, the snow sticks around. Year after year, it piles up. Eventually, you've got ice sheets forming. And once ice sheets start growing, they reflect more sunlight back into space, which cools things down even more, which allows more ice to form. It's a runaway feedback loop. But eccentricity isn't the only cycle. There's also obliquity, which is the tilt of Earth's axis. The more tilted Earth is, the more extreme the seasons. This tilt varies on a roughly 41,000-year cycle. When Earth is less tilted, the difference between summer and winter is milder, which means summer might not be warm enough to melt all the winter ice. Ice accumulates, ice age begins. The third cycle is precession or wobble. Earth wobbles on its axis there's something strange about the Earth's climate cycles, something that's puzzled scientists for decades. We know that our planet wobbles like a spinning top, and this wobble changes which hemisphere tilted toward the Sun, affecting the contrast between seasons on a 26,000-year cycle. But there's another cycle, a 100,000-year cycle, that's even more perplexing. It's the weakest of the three cycles that control Earth's long-term climate, yet it somehow dominates the entire system. When you combine these cycles, eccentricity, obliquity, and precession, they work together to shape our planet's climate over vast stretches of time. Right now, the Northern Hemisphere experiences winter when Earth is closest to the Sun, resulting in milder winters than would otherwise be the case. But this flips during other parts of the precession cycle, leading to much colder winters in the Northern Hemisphere. Scientists call this the 100,000-year problem, and they're still working to fully understand it. The leading theory suggests that feedback mechanisms amplify the eccentricity cycle. Perhaps it takes a long time for ice sheets to build up, but they can collapse relatively quickly. This would mean the system spends most of its time slowly accumulating ice during the cool phases, then rapidly melting when conditions shift to warming. This asymmetry could explain why the 100,000-year pattern is so prominent. What we know is that for the past million years or so, Earth has been going through these 100,000-year climate cycles. Slow buildup of ice over tens of thousands of years, then relatively rapid melting, followed by another slow buildup. And during the cold phases, the world became a stage for some of the most incredible animals ever to walk the planet. We call them megafauna, and the word mega is no exaggeration. Some of these creatures weighed 4,500 kilograms or more. There are various theories about why everything got so big during ice ages. One idea is Bergmann's rule, which states that in cold climates, mammals tend to be larger. A bigger body has a lower surface area to volume ratio, meaning less heat loss. This is why polar bears are bigger than other bear species and why Ice Age mammals tended toward the gigantic. But size alone doesn't tell the whole story. These animals had incredible adaptations for surviving in a frozen world. The most famous of them all, the poster child of the Ice Age, is the woolly mammoth. Woolly mammoths weren't actually as huge as you might think. They were about the same size as modern elephants, maybe a bit shorter, but their bodies were built completely differently. They had thick, shaggy fur with two layers, a dense underwool and longer outer guard hairs. This coat could be up to a meter long in places, providing insulation so effective that mammoths could handle temperatures of 40 degrees or colder. They also had small ears to minimize heat loss, unlike modern elephants with their big floppy ears used for cooling off. And they had a layer of fat up to 9 centimeters thick for extra insulation and energy storage. Their skulls were specially shaped too, with large sinus cavities that helped warm and humidify the cold, dry air before it reached their lungs. Breathing in super cold air can damage your lungs, so this was a crucial adaptation. And their teeth were perfect for grinding the tough grasses and sedges that grew on the mammoth steppe, a unique cold grassland ecosystem that covered huge areas during glacial periods. As their teeth wore down, new ones would move forward from the back of the jaw. A mammoth would go through 6 sets of teeth in its lifetime. We know so much about mammoths because some have been found frozen in permafrost, almost perfectly preserved, with fur, skin, and even stomach contents intact. Scientists have studied what they ate, extracted their DNA, and found that they had special hemoglobin variants that worked better in the cold, allowing their blood to deliver oxygen more efficiently in freezing temperatures. These animals were fine-tuned for Ice Age conditions. But mammoths weren't alone. The Ice Age world was packed with megafauna. Woolly rhinoceroses roamed the same landscapes, covered in thick fur with massive horns that could reach over a meter long. They used these horns to plow through snow to reach vegetation underneath. Giant ground sloths lived in the Americas, and these weren't the cute little tree sloths we know today. Some species weighed several tons and could stand up to 4 meters tall on their hind legs. They were too big to climb trees, so they lived on the ground, feeding on vegetation and, incredibly, digging burrows. We found their burrows, tunnels up to 40 meters long, with claw marks on the walls that match their fossilized claws perfectly. There were glyptodonts, basically car-sized armadillos with shells made of fused bone plates. They couldn't roll up like modern armadillos, but they didn't need to. Their shells were tough enough to stop most predators, and some species had club-like tails covered in bony spikes that they could swing as weapons. Recent studies suggest they might have been able to rear up on their hind legs, which means you could have had these armored tanks standing upright and swinging spiked clubs. That's both awesome and terrifying. And then there were the predators. Saber-toothed cats prowled the Americas with canine teeth up to 18 centimeters long, curved like daggers. They used these to deliver killing bites to the throat or belly of prey, causing massive bleeding. Cave lions in Europe and Asia were larger than modern lions. Giant short-faced bears in North America might have been the largest mammalian land predators ever, standing over 3 meters tall on their hind legs. Dire wolves hunted in packs and had more powerful jaws. The ice melted, just as it had before, but this time, most of the megafauna didn't make it. Within a few thousand years, they were gone. And I'm still trying to understand why the cycle that had sustained them for so long suddenly failed them. Was it because the warming happened too fast? Or was it because humans, who had been evolving and spreading during these cycles, had finally developed the technology and numbers to hunt these animals to extinction? Or was it some combination of both? Let's dive deep into what actually happens during one of these 100,000-year cycles. What does the planet look like at peak glaciation? How did these megafauna survive? And most importantly, what triggered the transition from glacial to interglacial? And why did it spell doom for so many species this time around? Let's drop into the last glacial maximum, about 20,000 years ago. This is when the 100,000-year cycle hit its coldest point. Ice sheets at their absolute peak, and the world nothing like today. I mean nothing. Picture this: ice sheets covering all of Canada, reaching down into what's now the northern United States. Ice up to 3 kilometers thick in some places. That's stacking the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, on top of itself more than 3 times. Except it's not steel and glass. It's solid ice, covering an area the size of a continent. The weight of all that ice was so enormous, it actually pressed down on the Earth's crust beneath it, deforming the solid rock. Europe had its own massive ice sheet, the Fennoscandian, blanketing Scandinavia, the Baltic, parts of Britain, and northern Russia. Between these two ice sheets, you're looking at maybe 15 million cubic kilometers of ice sitting on land. To put that in perspective, if you took all that ice and spread it evenly over the entire land surface of Earth, it would be about 100 meters deep everywhere. It's an almost incomprehensible amount of water, frozen solid. And with all that water locked up on land, sea levels dropped, not by a few meters, but by 120 meters. That's as tall as a 40-story building. Coastlines extended way beyond where they are today. The English Channel didn't exist. Britain was connected to mainland Europe by dry land. The Persian Gulf was a river valley. Indonesia, which is now thousands of islands, was mostly a single land mass connected to mainland Asia. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania formed one giant continent, and between Alaska and Siberia, where the Bering Strait is today, this huge grassy plain called Beringia existed. The world map looked completely different. But it's not just that the coastlines changed. The climate was totally different. It wasn't just colder, it was drier, way drier, with so much water locked in ice, and with colder ocean temperatures reducing evaporation, there was simply less moisture in the atmosphere. Deserts expanded, rainforests shrank to tiny pockets. What's now the Amazon basin was much drier, probably a mix of grassland and scattered trees. The Sahara was even bigger than it is today. Large parts of the world were covered in tundra or steppe, cold, dry grasslands with almost no trees. The ice sheets acted like giant refrigerators, generating cold, dense air that would flow off the ice in powerful winds. These winds picked up dust and silt from the exposed ground and carried it hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. Some parts of China have dust deposits over 100 meters thick that accumulated during glacial periods. The dust storms must have been incredible, blotting out the sun for days at a time. This was the world at peak glaciation, harsh, cold, dry, and windswept. And yet, life not only survived here, it thrived. The megafauna we talked about earlier weren't just barely scraping by. They were dominating these ecosystems, existing in numbers that probably matched or exceeded the density of large animals in Africa today. The mammoth steppe was the dominant ecosystem across huge swaths of the northern hemisphere. This was a type of grassland that doesn't really exist anymore. A unique mix of grasses, sedges, herbs, and low shrubs that could handle cold, dry conditions. And it supported enormous populations of large herbivores, mammoths, bison, horses, reindeer, all grazing together in huge herds. Must have been an incredible sight. Mammoths were the most iconic, but they weren't the only giants. Woolly rhinoceros were just as impressive, similar in size to modern rhinos, but built for the cold. They had thick, woolly coats, 2 horns, with the front one being absolutely massive, sometimes over a meter long. And they used these horns as snow plows to clear away snow and reach the vegetation underneath. We found woolly rhinos preserved in permafrost, too, just like mammoths, with their fur and soft tissue intact. And like mammoths, they show clear adaptations for extreme cold, including small ears and thick layers of fat. Giant ground sloths were dominating the Americas. Now, modern sloths are these cute, slow-moving animals that hang in rainforest trees. But Ice Age ground sloths were nothing like that. The largest species, Megatherium americanum, had an estimated body mass of 3,800 kilos. That's heavier than most elephants. They could stand on the hind legs and reach heights of 4 meters or more. These were elephant-sized sloths, too big to climb trees, living on the ground and feeding on vegetation. And here's where it gets really interesting. We found their burrows, actual tunnels dug into hillsides, some of them 40 meters long and nearly 2 meters wide. Imagine encountering a multi-ton sloth emerging from an underground tunnel. It sounds made up, doesn't it? But it really happened. The floors and ceilings of these burrows still exist, and they bear claw marks that match perfectly with ground sloth claws. I find myself wondering if they dug these burrows to escape the extreme temperatures, or perhaps to hide from predators. Then there were the glyptodons, another bizarre group. They were relatives of modern armadillos, but scaled up to truly ridiculous proportions. These creatures weighed up to 2 tons and walked on elephant-sized legs. Their bodies were protected by shells made of hundreds of bony plates fused together, a bit like a turtle, but much, much larger and heavier. These shells could be over 1.5 meters long, tough enough to stop almost any predator. Some glyptodon species even had tails covered in bony rings with spikes on the end. Essentially, a medieval mace attached to their body. Recent biomechanical studies suggest that they could rear up on their hind legs, Imagine these armored tanks standing upright and swinging their spiked tails as weapons. The diversity of megafauna during the Ice Age is staggering. In North America alone, you had mammoths, mastodons, a different family of proboscideans with different tooth structures, American horses, American camels, giant beavers the size of bears, stag moose with enormous antlers, and multiple species of giant ground sloths. In South America, there were even more ground sloth species, glyptodons, giant armadillos, toxodons, which were kind of like hippo-sized rodent relatives, and macrochenia, which looked like a strange cross between a camel and a small elephant with a trunk. In Eurasia, you had mammoths, woolly rhinos, cave bears, steppe bison, and giant deer called megaloceros, with antlers spanning over 3.5 meters. Of course, wherever you have large herbivores, you also have large carnivores hunting them. Saber-toothed cats are probably the most famous Ice Age predator. Smilodon, in the Americas, had those incredible canine teeth, up to 18 centimeters long and flattened like blades. These weren't for crushing bone or gripping, they were precision killing tools. Saber-tooths would use their powerful forelimbs to wrestle prey to the ground, then deliver a killing bite to the throat or belly, severing major blood vessels and causing rapid death from blood loss. The La Brea tar pits in California have preserved thousands of Ice Age animal bones, and saber-tooths are among the most common carnivores found there. This suggests they were successful predators, probably living in social groups like modern lions. And their prey wasn't small. They were taking down bison, young mammoths, horses, and giant ground sloths. Big, dangerous animals. Cave lions in Europe and Asia were larger than modern African lions and probably hunted similar prey. Cave bears, despite the scary name, were mostly herbivorous, but they were huge, up to half a ton, and their size alone made them formidable. Then there were giant short-faced bears in North America, which might have been the largest mammalian land predators ever to exist. These bears stood over 3 meters tall on their hind legs and may have weighed up to 800 kilograms. There's some debate about whether they were active predators or scavengers, but either way, you definitely didn't want to run into one. Dire wolves were another major predator, especially in the Americas. Real dire wolves, not the fantasy version. They were larger and more heavily built than modern gray wolves, with more powerful jaws designed for crushing bone. They hunted in packs and could take down prey much larger than themselves through coordinated attacks. The La Brea tar pits have yielded thousands of dire wolf fossils, more than any other carnivore, which suggests they were incredibly common. Even birds got in on the megafauna action. Teratorns were some of the largest flying birds ever, with wingspans over 3.5 meters. They probably soared on thermals like modern condors, searching for carrion, and there were even larger flightless birds in some regions. The Ice Age world had no shortage of impressive and terrifying predators. But here's what's really fascinating to me. All of these animals, from the smallest ground squirrels to the largest mammoths, were part of functioning ecosystems. They weren't just wandering around randomly. They had complex relationships with each other and with their environment. Herbivores competed for food and space. Predators hunted herbivores, and scavengers cleaned up the remains. Plants evolved to withstand grazing preys. It was all interconnected, and the megafauna themselves were ecosystem engineers. Mammoths, for example, didn't just eat grass, they knocked down trees, creating and maintaining open grasslands. They distributed nutrients across the landscape through their dung. They created trails and wallows. Their actions shaped the entire ecosystem. When you have animals that weigh several tons moving through an environment, they have a huge impact. Scientists have reconstructed these ancient ecosystems using multiple lines of evidence. Fossil assemblages tell us which animals lived together in the same places. Isotope analysis of bones and teeth tells us what they ate and what the climate was like. Ancient DNA can be extracted from permafrost sediments, even from sediments with no visible fossils. And this tells us which species were present. Cave paintings created by humans show what animals looked like and how they behaved. By combining all this evidence, we can paint a pretty detailed picture of Ice Age life. One thing that's become clear is that these ecosystems weren't static. They changed and shifted as the climate fluctuated. Remember, even within a glacial period, there were shorter-term climate variations. Events called Dansgaard-Oeschger oscillations caused rapid warming spikes lasting decades to centuries, then rapid cooling again. I've always been struck by how dynamic the Ice Age world truly was. It wasn't just a static, frozen landscape. Temperatures constantly shifted, impacting animal habitats, vegetation, and the survival of different species. It's a world almost impossible to imagine now. Humans were, of course, a part of this world. Our ancestors coexisted with the megafauna, hunting them, competing with predators, and adapting their technology and culture to survive the glacial conditions. In Europe, Neanderthals had already endured these cycles for hundreds of thousands of years. They were remarkably cold-adapted, with stocky builds and large nasal cavities to warm the frigid air. Their tools were sophisticated, and they were skilled hunters of megafauna, even displaying symbolic culture through art and burial rituals. Then, around 45,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, arrived in Europe. We brought new technologies, more complex social structures, and wider trade networks. For thousands of years, we shared the landscape and the megafauna with the Neanderthals. Genetic evidence now reveals that we even interbred, with most people of European or Asian descent carrying a small percentage of Neanderthal DNA. In other parts of the world, modern humans were also adapting to Ice Age conditions, living alongside megafauna in Asia, Australia, which humans reached at least 65,000 years ago, and eventually the Americas. The interaction between humans and megafauna is a topic of much debate in Ice Age research, one we'll explore later. But for now, try to appreciate the sheer diversity and strangeness of life during peak glaciation. Imagine standing at the last glacial maximum, gazing out over a landscape of ice sheets and cold grasslands, with mammoths, rhinos, and giant sloths moving through it. It's a sight that will likely never be seen again. These ecosystems are now gone. The megafauna are extinct. The mammoth steppe has vanished, replaced by forests and tundra. It's a lost world. But that world was created by the 100,000-year cycle. The cold phases of the cycle created the conditions, and life adapted to fill every available niche. For hundreds of thousands of years, this pattern repeated: cold phase, Megafauna thrive, warm phase, forests expand, cold phase again, megafauna return. It was a rhythm that life on Earth had adapted to. Then, about 19,000 years ago, something shifted. The orbital cycles were moving into a configuration that favored warming. Northern Hemisphere summers were getting stronger, and the ice sheets began to melt. What happened next would change everything. The transition from the last glacial period to our current interglacial was one of the most dramatic climate changes in recent Earth history. And caught in the middle of that transition were all these megafauna that had evolved to thrive in a frozen world. Most of them wouldn't make it through. We've touched on what these Ice Age giants looked like, but now let's delve into the details of how they actually lived. The more we learn about these animals, the more incredible they become, and some of the discoveries are genuinely surprising. Take, for instance, the seemingly impossible. Giant ground sloths digging massive burrows. When scientists first found these tunnels in South America, particularly in Argentina near Mar del Plata, they were hewn of their origin. The burrows were enormous, some reaching 5 to 6 meters below the surface, up to 1.8 meters wide and 40 meters long. That's like a 2-story house worth of tunnel underground. Multiple mammal species were considered as possible diggers, but the evidence kept pointing to ground sloths, specifically species like Glossotherium and Celidotherium. The first clue was their arm bones. Ground sloth forelimbs were designed in a shovel-like structure with unusually long second and third fingers, perfect for digging. And the bones were incredibly strong, designed to withstand the bending forces you'd get from digging through hard soil, similar to the stresses that galloping mammals put on their leg bones. The second clue was their center of gravity. Paleontologists estimated from the skeleton that ground sloths had their center of gravity above their hind feet, meaning they could rear up into a bipedal posture. This is crucial for digging because your arms need to be free to excavate, not supporting your body weight. You can't dig effectively if you're on all fours. And the final smoking gun, claw marks on the walls and ceilings of the burrows, perfectly preserved in the fossilized tunnels. Scientists matched these marks to ground sloth hand skeletons, and they fit exactly. These sloths weren't just big, they were engineering huge underground structures, even though the animals weighed 800 to 200 kilograms.